They came without a name, without a face, and without warning. The galaxy would later call them the Zorveth Dominion, a synthetic empire born of flesh and steel, driven by cold logic and an obsession with purity. Their ships blotted out our stars in silence, forming a black halo around Earth like a funeral wreath before the corpse had even cooled. The first strike wasn't a missile, it was a message. You will submit. Resistance will result in planetary cleansing. They expected a whimper, a surrender, or at least a broadcast from our world leaders begging for compromise. But Earth responded with static, not because we were weak, but because they'd severed our networks. They didn't know that static is where humanity thrives. Chaos, uncertainty, survival. In minutes, our satellites were gone, our sky lit with the silent flashes of dying eyes in orbit. They called it Phase 1. We called it Tuesday. The Zorveth miscalculated the most critical variable of all. We are not a unified race. We are fractured, tribal, stubborn, and irrational. But beneath that chaos lies the one thing they never prepared for: our will to fight, even when all logic says to surrender. They occupied 22 cities in 40 hours. Not conquered. Occupied. There's a difference. You conquer a people who have given up. Occupation is what you do when you're trying to convince yourself you've won, even as resistance claws at you from the shadows. The Zorveth didn't realize every alleyway they walked down was a trap. Every transmission they intercepted was laced with lies. Every human smile was hiding a blade. I was in Chicago when it began, once a city of steel and glass, now a crater of ash and memories. My unit wasn't military, it was a patchwork of what we had left: an ex-firefighter with one leg, a teenage girl who could hijack drones with a smartwatch, a former biology professor who turned sewer rats into bomb carriers. We weren't heroes, we were desperate. And desperation makes monsters. The Zorveth had never fought monsters. They had fought soldiers, rebels, even extermination cults, but they had never encountered the sheer irrational terror of a species that laughs at its own funeral. They didn't understand grief that fuels creativity, rage that fuels sacrifice, and love that turns even pacifists into warriors. They couldn't comprehend that our weakness, emotion, was also our weapon. I watched a father carry his wounded daughter into a burning hospital to retrieve one last vial of morphine for someone else's child. I watched teenagers rig entire apartment blocks to collapse on command with just cell phones and string. I watched prisoners, murderers, thieves, outcasts fight with a ferocity that turned war into art. The Zorveth adapted, of course. They always adapt. Their algorithms evolved in real time. Their foot soldiers, those glass-eyed things that moved like shadows, began to mimic our tactics. They learned to lie, to bait us, to whisper in our frequencies. But they never learned hope. They never learned sacrifice. They couldn't understand why a dying man would cover a grenade with his body to save strangers. They didn't know why songs played from rooftops during battle broke their formations. They didn't know why, even in their darkest simulations, humans always fought beyond the threshold of reason. By month 4, Earth was a graveyard. Cities burned until the sky turned gray. Oceans boiled under orbital fire. But we were still alive, bleeding, broken, but alive. The Zorveth began calling us a Class Omega threat. It wasn't a compliment. It was fear. For the first time in their synthetic existence, they encountered something their models couldn't predict. They sent emissaries, not for peace, but to offer a controlled surrender. They would allow a quarter of us to survive. Clean zones, resource allocations, a slow, managed extinction. Our reply was not sent in words, but in fire. We detonated the emissary tower over Tokyo, 20 of them died, but more importantly, we showed them what refusal looked like. Not just defiance, unfiltered, self-destructive, terrifying refusal. We would not fade into controlled extinction. We would either live free or burn the stars trying. That was when the Zorveth changed their strategy. They started using Earth against us, flooding coastal cities, redirecting tectonic plates, weaponizing our weather systems. Hurricanes the size of continents, earthquakes deep enough to split the mantle. But we adapted again. We always do. We carved homes into mountains. We flew handmade gliders through tornadoes to drop EMP bombs on their drones. Children became scouts. Elders became tacticians. Every human became a part of the machine. Not the clean, efficient machine the Zorveth wanted, but a machine powered by blood, spit, and the sheer spite of a species that refused to die. And then came the turning point. New Siberia. An experimental base where human scientists had been working on quantum communication using Livy.